Welcome to Malta. I'm here at one of the several beautiful marinas that are surrounding the capital Valletta, and I'm going to do a proper check of Malta as a private equity centre. Coming up. In this video, we're going to be looking at Malta as a financial centre in which to set up a private equity fund. And more specifically, I'm going to look at it from the point of view of a mid-cap fund rather than a large fund. Large funds have large management fees, which allow them to fully fund the back office. Mid-cap funds, particularly those on the smaller end, for example, managing less than, say, 50 million euros, will need to consider costs carefully, as well as whether they would get the same level of attention and service than a larger fund. This is where Malta might be of interest. Malta has a fascinating history, dating back to the Phoenicians and beyond. Malta is located in the southern Mediterranean Sea, with Sicily being just 80 kilometres to its north, Tunis to its west, Tripoli to its south, and Greece a bit further to its east. It has strong cultural ties to both the UK and Italy, and almost all Maltese speak English, and many also speak Italian. Its population of 540,000 compares with the 670,000 of Luxembourg, one of its main competitor financial centres. Malta is an enthusiastic member of the European Union and joined in 2004. It has seen its financial services industry develop steadily, with funds registered in Malta growing to reach over 500 investment funds as of 2023. Just like Luxembourg, a lot of Maltese work in the financial services area, with an estimated 20,000 people, representing 6% of the total workforce. Let's assume I'm a mid-cap private equity fund manager operating in Europe, the Middle East or Africa, and I'm looking to set up my funds and my fund management company somewhere. I'm going to make some comparison between Malta and other options. The natural comparison will be with Ireland, Luxembourg and Cyprus within the EU, and Mauritius and the United Arab Emirates outside of the EU. In order to keep it simple, I'm going to look at the IESE Business School Venture Capital and Private Equity Attractiveness Index, which they publish on a biannual basis, with 2023 being the last available one. What IESE does is to analyse each country from the point of view of their attractiveness as a private equity destination by looking at a combination of macroeconomic and other indicators for each country. This is useful because it saves us the work of trawling through GDP data and having to figure out what it means for the PE industry. On the table at the top, we have the overall ranking and score out of 100. We can see that Malta ranks similarly to Luxembourg and Cyprus, with a rank of 59 compared to 51 for Luxembourg and 49 for Cyprus. It will be interesting to see the 2025 rankings when they are published. My guess is that Malta will move up quite a bit given the work they have done in the last few years to upgrade themselves. In the bottom table, we see more of the detailed breakdown of the factors making up the overall score. We can see that Malta is broadly in line with the others, with no outlier values except for taxation. One issue we should address is that Malta was placed on the so-called grey list by the Financial Action Task Force in 2021 for about 1 year. They were required to make changes in their approach to tax evasion, establishing ultimate beneficial ownership, and information sharing with local and international authorities. There were some issues here, to be fair, but we should point out that a number of other financial centres, such as in the Caribbean, were also on the list for a while. There's also a bit of politics in this, with the Americans protecting centres in the Americas and being more strict with European centres. As of today, I would say this issue is firmly in the rearview mirror. One of the key indicators of the health and potential of the country's private equity market is its overall capital market, especially the stock market. The two important direct contact points are firstly on exit, whether the stock market allows for IPO exits, and secondly, whether pension funds are active investors in stocks which means they will eventually also be ready to become investors in private equity funds as they develop and diversify. I will caveat what I've just said somewhat, in that what I just mentioned is relevant to the domestic private equity industry of the country. In the case of a financial centre, the reality is that the majority of funds incorporated there will not be investing in the domestic economy of the country of the financial centre, but will simply set up shop there to invest in other places. Still, the development of the local capital markets remains an important indirect indicator. Looking at the market capitalisation, Malta can be seen to be comparable to Mauritius and Cyprus. Its development has been a little mixed. The number of listed companies has increased a lot from 2014 to 2024. On the other hand, the market return to 2024 was disappointing, and trading volumes declined since 2019. Typical company float was 32%, indicating that most companies are controlled by a few of their largest shareholders. However, the market is a well-organised and regulated platform connected to the Deutsche Börse system. Let's turn to the regulator of the industry. The private equity industry is regulated by the Malta Financial Services Authority. The MFSA is fully aligned with EU regulations and the EU 2011 Alternative Fund Manager Directive and its subsequent legislation. They've all been fully transcribed into Maltese laws and regulations. When dealing with a regulator as a fund manager, you're looking for several things. Firstly, are the rules clear? Second, do they speak good English? Third, are they approachable and available? Fourth, can I have a hypothetical conversation to get guidance ahead of doing whatever I'm planning? In the case of the MFSA, the answer to all these questions is yes. In my work, I have found them to be particularly responsive and open to the extent that I would say they have developed a competitive advantage over the regulators in the other jurisdictions I've referred to. This approachability is especially important for mid-cap fund managers who have less of a budget for their structuring decisions. One last point I want to make as regards regulation and legal frameworks is what happens if you end up having to go to court. In Malta, English is an official language. If you end up litigating in Luxembourg, Cyprus or the UAE, you're going to end up having to conduct your proceedings in French, Greek and Arabic respectively. In Malta, you will have English in all circumstances, which is very important. We are looking to set up our mid-cap fund. Let's look at the regulatory umbrellas available to us. As a rule of thumb, it tends to be the case that as your fund gets bigger and you have more LPs, you go for more and more regulated structures. What we have in Malta should be familiar with anyone with knowledge of EU regulations. Starting from the left, we first have UCITS, which is not so relevant. UCITS stands for Undertaking for Collective Investment in Transferable Securities. As private equity securities are not transferable, this structure is relevant really only for listed securities. Then we have the Alternative Investment Fund structure, which is common throughout the EU and therefore fully passportable. Next is the Notified Alternative Investment Fund, which is a lighter version of the AIF. It is quite similar to the Luxembourg so-called Reserved Alternative Investment Fund. Then we have the two Malta-specific structures. The first is the Professional Investment Fund, which is directly regulated by the MFSA. The last and lightest is the Notified Professional Investment Fund, which is not directly regulated by the MFSA. Instead, the MFSA relies on currently 16 authorised fund administrators, one of which any fund is required to engage to perform a due diligence and subsequent monitoring of the notified PIF. The other variable, which is material, is whether a fund is self-managed or third-party managed, meaning the fund would hire an existing AIFM-approved fund management company to formally manage the fund, with the actual fund manager having the status of a contractor to the formal fund manager. Hiring a third-party manager will have the benefit of upgrading the regulatory regime, which can be attractive to LPs and other stakeholders of the fund. It will, however, add an extra layer of cost. Having settled upon which level of regulatory regime I'm happy with, I now need to decide which is the most convenient corporate structure to make use of for my fund and my fund manager. Like most countries in the world, Malta has public limited companies and limited liability companies with similar characteristics. After these, we have the SICAV structure, which is an EU-wide option, quite convenient for multi-fund or sub-fund arrangements. This means, for example, that you can operate two different funds with their own respective sets of investors using just one vehicle, typically by issuing different classes of shares. Then we get to partnership structures, where there is most commonly differences between countries. In private equity, the most commonly used is the ENCO-type partnership, as it envisages a general partner to operate the partnership. This year, Malta introduced the special limited partnership, according to which the partnership itself has no legal substance. This means in practice it is simpler to operate as everything is done in the name of the GP. I would probably go for a partnership structure for my fund and an LLC structure for my fund manager. Let's conclude by summarising my best options as a mid-cap manager and looking at the costs. I would like to express my appreciation to Annabelle Mifsud of FexServe Funds for doing all the detailed costings for this video. So my three best options are firstly the most regulated, the third-party managed NIAF. The annual cost is heavier due to having to pay for the third-party manager. The second most regulated is the self-managed PIF, and thirdly the self-managed NPIF. Interestingly, the costs of these last two are quite similar. This is quite different to, for example, Luxembourg and Ireland, where the costs ramp up quickly as you move up the regulatory scale. Overall, I would say the costs are fairly comparable to other centres, such as those I mentioned, as well as others like Cyprus, Mauritius and the UAE. So what would be my conclusion about Malta as a financial centre to set up my mid-cap fund? I would say it is a rapidly improving jurisdiction, moving ahead quickly to make itself attractive, open to suggestions, and firmly within the European Union, while at the same time keeping some of that Mediterranean flexibility and informality. Think of that old television ad for Avis Rent-A-Car, which was number 2 to Hertz at the time. The slogan was, "We try harder," and I would say this is very applicable to Malta's approach. So that's it for Malta as a private equity centre. Interesting, up and coming, and now I'm off on my yacht. Thanks a lot. See you next time.